The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's learning webinar. My name is Chantal, and I'm going to be your host today as we discuss roof framing. We're going to go and look at rafter framing and some truss framing as well, and look at all of the different settings in them so you understand all of the settings behind the framing and you can customize them to suit your needs on your own projects. Um, Following the presentation, I'm going to open up the chat panel and answer any questions that you might have about roof framing so I can illustrate them to you today during our time together. And then following the entire presentation, we'll email you out a little booklet and a link to today's class. It is being recorded so that you can watch it again if you need to. So let's get started and look at roof framing. So on our screen today, all I did is drawn a building that is 20 feet by 15 feet. And we're going to put a roof on it to understand the different selections that you have for that. So I'm just going to go up to the roof by perimeter. I'm going to go over to the catalog panel, select the 812 hip roof, and left click to insert that. Now I want to talk about gable ladder framing. So I am going to select and create some gables. So I'm going to select two sides and right click and look at the properties of this roof. So first of all, I am just going to change this to be a gable roof. Looking at the roof framing, there is a button for specify framing for the roof itself. Now, if you are one of our Pro Architect clients, you won't see that specify framing. This is available in Building Essentials and Construction Suite. So follow along. For those of you in Pro Architect or Personal Architect, you won't have these settings, but at least you can understand what's happening in the background if it does frame the roof for you. So I'll select specify framing. In here, we've broken down all of the different pieces of lumber that are used to frame the roof when you're stick framing the roof itself. So first of all, we're going to be looking at rafters. So the very first option is the rafter itself. If this is set to yes, you will see rafters framed throughout the building. It'll automatically follow the settings that we're going to put in and use rafters underneath that roof surface. So I'm going to keep that at yes to begin. And then you'll see that it lists down the member that it's going to use. There's a usage and phase, and that's for the material list. So it's being used, this 2x8 is being used as a rafter, and it's going to be organized in a material list with all other roof framing materials. The spacing of that 2x8 rafter is going to be 1'4". So every 16 inches, we're going to see a rafter. If you want to change any of these settings, you simply click on that option. And then you'll notice it highlights blue and there's a little button that'll appear to the right. So you can click on that button, go out to the catalog and select any member size that you want to use. So if you're not using 2x8s, if you're maybe using some engineered roofing materials for your rafters, you can specify that you just select it here in the catalog. So everything that has a yes is going to be included when we go to frame the roof. If there is a hole put in the roof, perhaps for a skylight, it will frame around that opening with 2x8s. It'll still call them rafters, but you could call them anything else that you want to as well. The fascia board, right now it's set to a 1x8, but again, I can go out to the catalog and I'm just going to select a 2x10 just to illustrate that you can change these and click OK. It's going to be labeled as subfascia in our material list and organized with all the other roofing materials. The ridge beam, yes. Right now it's a 2x8. I'm going to again click out to our catalog. I'm going to go down to our engineered materials and I'm going to go to beams and headers and I'm going to select a 3.5 material. So I'll do the 3.5 by 9.5 PSL and click OK. So that's going to be my ridge beam. There's going to be one of them, but I could have multiple ridge members there. So if I did want to comprise that of, two 2x10s or three 2x10s or whatever, I can have multiple ridge beams there. You just increase that number. Okay, but it has to be at this point the same member. So 3.5 by 9.5s, or three 2x10s. It has to just be the same member, but they're all make up your ridge beam. our hip boards, I'm going to leave those at 2x8s, and same with our valley boards. So it's going to use all of these different members when it's framing out all of these different pieces. The gable is also going to be a 2x8, and we're calling that subfascia. But again, that usage could be any name that you want. Now we come into our gable ladder framing. And I'll illustrate this once we go back out to look at the framed roof. I'll point out all of these different pieces and where they're being framed. So we have our gable ladder. I'm going to set that to yes. Right now it's set to be using 2x6s, and that's fine. There's an option here to be to structure or to be fixed. So I'm just going to draw out a little diagram here. So I have my gable roof, and I'm just going to go back here. So I apologize for the crude drawing here. So here's my first rafter. So for our gable ladder framing, it can either go back fixed to that first rafter that we have. So it's just going to fix itself to it. The other option that you get, and that's going back to the structure. If I was to pick fixed instead here, then you'll notice that when I pick fixed, I get an option there for a distance. So instead of going fixed back to my first rafter, I can set a distance. So I could say, as an example, 3 feet. And then that first rafter will be set back 3 feet, and that gable ladder framing will extend back to it. So you can either have it go back to the very first structure, the first one that's going to be put in there, or you can set a distance that you want it back. The distance between the gable ladders, so these 2x6s that are going to run down between these two rafters, I've got it set to 2 feet. Again, that can be any distance. All of this is editable. You just have to click in there and change it. Next, we have collar ties. I'm going to set that to yes as well. And for those of you that don't stick frame your roofs, you're using them for trusses, you can still take advantage of some of these members. So for example, your fascia board, you're still going to need fascia board with your trusses. You could leave that to yes and have everything else to no. And for your collar ties and rafter ties, those could be just temporary bracing that you're using for your trusses when they're going in. So even though you're not hand framing, stick framing the roof, you're using trusses, you can still take advantage of some of these different members on where they're being placed. So I'm going to use the collar tie, set that to yes. I'm going to leave it as a 2x6, label it as a collar tie, grouped with all our roof framing members, the vertical distance from the ridge. So the top of our ridge beam down 2 feet is going to be the top of my collar tie. Again, that distance could be whatever you want. If you want that to be 18 inches or you want that to be 4 feet, you set that. Maximum span. So this means that my collar ties don't have to happen at every rafter. I could have them set every 4 feet. So skipping 3 rafters and putting in the next collar tie. So this again can be any distance that you want it to be as well. And that's the same for our rafter ties. I'm going to set this to yes as well. So where and I'm going to grab my little pen here again, where we have our collar ties at the very top, our rafter ties, or what you might use them for also is for your ceiling joists, are happening at the bottom. So again, they're set to 2x6. We're calling them a rafter tie. They're going to be organized with all of our roof framing members and the vertical distance from support. And we've got this set at 5.5 inches. 5.5 inches is the 2x6. So the top of this rafter tie is going to be 5.5 inches, the thickness of that board, up from the base of this. So it would be an excellent ceiling joist or a rafter tie, if you will. And again, the spacing, the maximum spacing here, we've got it 4 feet. That can be 16 inches. That can be 6 inches, whatever you want it to be. You set that distance there, and it will match that when it's framing it. Scrolling down, we also have purlins. So I'm going to set this to yes. I'm going to use a 2x4 for the purlin. So the purlin is going on the inside of the framing. So the inside face within the attic space of our roof framing, we have our purlins. And I'm going to use 2x4s, and they're going to run down the length of my roof, perpendicular to our rafters. We're going to label them as purlins, group them with all of our roof framing members. We can rotate them any degree of angle. I've got this rotated at 90 degrees, and I'll show you that when we go in. The spacing is going to be every 2 feet. So every 2 feet coming down from the ridge beam, there's going to be a purlin. Offset from the ridge to start 1 foot and then 2 feet thereafter. When it gets down to the fascia board, we could also say don't go right to the fascia board. We could have an offset so it sits up a little higher than that fascia board as well. But to illustrate these settings, I'll leave them as B for today. So the spacing is every 2 feet, we're going to see a purlin board. That's 1 foot. The first one is initially going to be 1 foot off the ridge and then 2 foot thereafter. When you have a multi-surface roof, so you have lots of hips and lots of gables happening and all different surfaces in a very complex roof, every time you hit a different surface, you can reset the spacing. So I'm coming along with my 2 feet, and then I hit another surface. Do I reset it and set it up if the ridge sits higher in that section and reset it? Or do I say, no, just keep running it through all at the same heights all the way through the roof? So we could set that to no. Okay. Place it at segment boundary. So do I want one right at the boundary? Yes or no. And place it at the whole back. So I've held it back from the fascia. Do I want one right there at that held back, or no? Follow the next available spacing when I was coming down the roof from the ridge. And those settings are the same for our battens. So the battens are going to be the outside of our roof rafters, sitting just outside of where our roof sheathing will be. And I'm going to set this to yes. We're going to label them, and these will be 2x2. So we'll be able to see and distinguish the purlins from the battens, also from the inside, outside of our rafters, but from the size as well. They'll be organized with all of our roof framing. I'm not going to rotate them. A 2x2 is a 2x2 if you have it 90 degrees or 0 degrees. The spacing, again, is going to be every 2 feet after we have our initial 1 foot from the ridge. And when it comes down to the fascia, no, I'm not going to hold it back. It's going to come right down to the fascia. Okay, so I'm going to click OK right now at all of those settings. And OK again, it's going to change this to a gable, and then all of our framing settings will be applied. So click OK. I'm going to pop this in to a 3D view and go to View, Framing, and Display the Framing. And we can see all of that framing coming in together. I'm just going to turn off the visibility of walls so it becomes easier to distinguish the roof framing. Okay, so there's all of our roof framing. And I'm also going to turn it into a rendered outline so we can see the lines. So let me just point out the different elements that we put in. Here's our 2x10 fascia board. It's nice and deep. Here's our gable ladder framing. You can see those boards running through here every 2 feet down our gable ends on both sides. This board right here and this board right here, there we have our purlins and our battens coming down the roof itself. And if I give this a little bit of a twist, so I'm just going to rotate this view. When I do that, you'll be able to see our boards, our collar ties, and our rafter ties. Maybe I'll put this in an elevational view. I'll just put this in a left elevation view. Here's a good view of that, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit closer. So here we can see our rafter tie and our collar tie. And sitting on the inside face and the outside face, we've got that 2x2 and that 2x4 for our battens and our purlins running along the roof. So again, even though you don't use rafter framing, if you strictly are truss framing, still take advantage of those elements that you're still going to have to provide. You might still want to have the battens and the purlins for temporary bracing, or the collar ties and the rafter ties going in. You can turn on and off the different elements that you want, and you will still need that fascia board to attach to as well. So you can put all of those in, even though you're rafter framing, not rafter framing, you're truss framing. So those are how you get all of the different elements for rafter framing, and all of those will be included in your material list. Once they're turned on, they fully count and become part of that list as well. I'm going to turn back on our roof surface. So just going to turn on the roof surface, click OK there. I need it to be able to select it. So I still have my roof framing on it, but when I want to change settings for the roof, you have to pick the surface for that. So that's why I've turned the surface back on. So I'm going to select the surface, right click, and look at its properties. I'm going to go back to that specify framing dialog box. And when I'm in there, I'm going to turn off our rafters. I'm going to turn off the ridge board, turn that off. No. Hip boards, set these all to no, because I'm now going to go through and put in some trusses. Our valley boards are a no. Gable boards are a no. I'll keep the gable ladder, but just for a cleaner look, I am going to turn off the collar ties, the rafter ties, and our purlins, and our battens. Okay, so everything shut down now to a no, but I'm going to keep that gable ladder just, well, I'll turn that off as well, so it's just a little bit cleaner. So everything's now set to a no. There's no opening, so I can keep that opening header. Click OK. I'm going to go now to the Support and Details tab. This tab at the top gives us the height of where we first put our rafters to sit on it. So the rafter sitting here on that bird's mouth cut that we have in the seat. If I change this to truss, now we, instead of having our bird's mouth and our seat cut for a rafter, now we're looking at raised heel, which some of you might refer to as an energy heel. It's just a different name. They both have the same effect here. So you can raise that heel height for your trusses in here. So when I click OK, you can see that everything empties out. There's no trusses. We haven't engineered any trusses. There's nothing there for the trusses. All we're left with, and if I hide, pick item to hide that surface, you can see all we're left with are those two fascia boards. That's it. No trusses. So I'm going to put this back into a 2D view. View, framing, display all butter framing, so we have our surface back. Now let's start adding in some trusses so we can see how we can do trusses in two different ways. I'm going to come back up to the roof tool where we initially put on that roof. And at the very bottom, we see the option for truss run. So I'm going to select truss run and click OK. In the catalog, we have one truss sitting in there. It's a fink truss. So if I double click on this fink truss, it'll bring up its properties. So here I can tell it when I go to do this truss run, what's the spacing between the trusses? 2 feet. What's the front offset? So when I first have my first truss, how far away from the wall is that first truss? I've got that as 2 feet as well. Again, you can edit these. The back offset, so when I come to my last truss, how far back from that last wall is it going to be? And I've got it at 3 feet, 3 3/8, but again, any distance you want. And then we get into the truss width. So when you're looking at the thickness of the truss itself, I've got 1.5 inches. Again, it can be any thickness. Whatever your truss is going to be, you're going to want that to be that thickness. The bottom chord thickness, you can see here in the little diagram, we're showing you that bottom chord. And what is that height of that bottom chord? 3.5 inches. So it's like we're using a 2x4. The web thickness, so through here, the fink truss, we've got the webbing going through. How thick is that? It's a 2x4, it's 3.5 inches. And what is the maximum spacing between those webs, and I've got that as 6 feet. Okay. Once I have all of those settings, then when we go through and I go to truss run, you put your cursor and I'm not left clicking, I'm just putting my cursor on the roof, and it automatically recognizes your roof. And you can see it tries to put on its first truss in that first position, 2 feet off of my wall. And there's a green arrow there. I want to draw your attention down to the lower left-hand corner. Pick roof edge at start of truss. Okay, so it's showing me the first edge that it sees. If I wanted to start it there, I left click. And then I just move my cursor through the roof and it draws the rest of them. That last truss, when I see it, you see the red arrow. And then it says, if you look down the lower left-hand corner of my screen, pick extent point or roof edge for valley back hip. And I left click again. Okay, so you could have multiple roofs and it will recognize there's a valley coming in or a hip coming down, and it will put those through. Okay, so it puts in those trusses. I right click and tell it that I'm finished. I only have this one surface. So if I put this in a left elevational view and go to view, framing, display the framing, and I'm just going to again turn off the visibility of the walls so we don't see the wall framing too. We can see that Fink truss going through. If I left click on it, you can see the truss itself going through. Okay, so there's our Fink truss. And if I look at that in a 3D view, we can see the row of them going back. And there still is our fascia boards. Okay, so that is just doing a truss run. I'm going to select one of them, and then I'm going to hit delete. Get rid of them. They work as a group. View, framing, display all but the framing. Back down into a 2D view. The other option that we have for indicating trusses is to put in single trusses. So under the members command, if I click on the arrow beside it, one of the options that we have there is insert single timber frame or insert timber frames. Okay, so you can do timber frames or a single timber frame. And then we have a variety of trusses in the catalog. So I'm going to look at this scissor truss. I'm going to left click on it. Then I'm going to right click on it and say edit that element. Okay, the trusses that are here in the catalog have all of their properties set to it. And that includes the overall length of that truss. Okay, so we know that my building, as I said at the very beginning, was 15 feet by 20 feet. So I need that truss support to go 15 feet. Okay, so you have all of these options. This B option here is that overall length, and this is 15 feet. But if my building was an overall length 20 feet, before I insert this, I need to change that overall length because it will be too short. It doesn't automatically adjust to the width of your building. This is just putting in a truss on your building itself. Okay, so it's not going to recognize that you have to put that length in. So I've got that 15 feet. The other options that you have here then, if going from there, is slope value. So when we're looking at the slope of the outside of that scissor truss, it's an 812. My roof is an 812. So I can take that. But I could change that to a 612 or a 1212 depending on the slope of my roof so that truss is correct. Okay. We also have our A. What is the overall height that you set there? So with our 15-foot span and an 8 and 12 roof, it automatically put that to 5 feet. Okay, so the maximum spacing that we're going to have is 3 feet, and the support height that is going to be placed in on. So when I go to place this truss in, the bottom chord of that truss is going to be sitting at 8 foot 1 1/8 to sit on top of my walls. And when I go to place them, they're going to be every 3 feet, evenly spaced. And the overall height is 5 feet based on an 8 and 12 slope and an overall length of 15 feet. And then we get into, this is a scissor truss. So the scissor in the middle here is 8 feet wide. And DY1 here, the intermediate supports in here are going to be 2 feet apart and 2 feet down. So you can see that coming in here. And the slope value of my scissor truss is a 4 in 12. And F value here, the height coming up, is 1'6". Again, these can all be changed. If I change that to 12, it changes my truss. Okay, so this can all be changed, and that will interactively show you the difference here on the right. You can see that you can do all different types of trusses here. Pick the style of truss that you need, and then alter the values like I am right now. Okay, I'm going to get cancel. I don't want to change the one that's in my catalog. And then I pick scissor truss. So when I go to put in my scissor truss, looking down in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, you see pick first side of timber frame. And I'm going to pick here. And then it says pick the span direction. So I'm going to be spanning here. And then telling me that I'm currently got this turned off, I click OK. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Edit, undo. Pick my scissor truss, pick my first point here. The span direction, sorry, is up this direction, and I've got my first scissor truss in. It's got that one in that I wanted, that one truss. So if I look out in my left elevation view again, and view, view, framing, display framing, and then turn off the visibility of my walls again, we'll be able to see that truss. Okay, so we get our truss put in. Okay, so you can automatically frame a roof with rafters by turning all of the properties on and changing all of the sizes that I showed you today. So we looked at inserting the rafters and putting in the fascia boards. We put in some battens and purlins, and we put in some gable end framing to show you how you could put all of those in. Then we erased all of that away, turned off everything but our fascia boards, and we looked at creating a truss run all the way through our building, inserting a truss. Or we could do a single truss, like we did with the single truss and the single timber frame, and we put in the one scissor truss. We could do the same with multiple trusses using the scissor truss as well. It will look at that spacing and put them every 3 feet, just the same way we did the single truss. So lots of ways to frame out your building using the framing that you need based on either rafter framing or putting in truss framing. All of the various settings that I looked at today and the insertion methods that I used are in a booklet that I'm going to send you so that you can read about all the different settings and try to change them to match your framing standards that you're using. So when you're virtually framing in Envisioneer, it's matching actually how you're framing on site as well. So you're going to get your piece counts right for all the different materials that you're going to use. Big takeaway today, I'm just going to go to view, framing, display all but the framing. When you're looking at the roof properties, remember that in the specify framing dialog box, even if you're not going to be rafter framing, even if you are 100% trusses on all your builds, remember the individual pieces that still can be left on that you still can use for your truss framing, and turn those to yes, and it will frame with those as well. What I'd like to do now is answer any questions that you might have about framing your roofs in Envisioneer. In the GoToMeeting console, that'll be on the right-hand side of your screen, you can type in any questions that you might have about framing roofs in Envisioneer. I can answer those live during this presentation today. And again, everything that I have covered up to this point will be in a book that I'm going to send you. So let me just go and see what questions we have today so far. You're a quiet crowd. So that means you have a good understanding of everything that we just covered, or you're too shy to ask anything. And please never be too shy to ask anything during these webinars. This is your opportunity to learn. So if you do have a question or have something that you want to ask, please type it in. Otherwise, if you don't, play with these settings. And if there is, while you're playing with them and getting familiar with them, always remember that you have technical support as well. You can always call in to our support line or use our live chat on our website or email us a copy of your project file and we can look at it and we can answer your questions on the different settings there as well. So either everyone's got a good understanding and understands everything that I covered today, which is fantastic. Otherwise, you're shy, and please take the time to look over those settings, play with them a little bit, and then please do call our technical support line or email us in so we can make sure that you understand all of these and you're going to be using them. So I'll leave that this webinar open for 1 more minute. And if there aren't any questions, then we'll end off. This is our last class of 2023, and we will continue our classes going into the new year in 2022. We'll start our new classes in 2023. And we have a whole lineup that you can find on our website. So for those of you that maybe register for all of your classes through our newsletter, you can also find our list of classes on our website. So if you ever want to register for a class, you can do so ahead of time on our website. So I'm going to take you there right now. So at www.cadsoft.com, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of our homepage, you will see events and training. If you click on that, we update this on a regular basis and you will see our training calendar. And that will take you into February of 2023. So you can come and register for any of the different classes. Now, the ones that you see that are interactive, those are a 2-hour longer session. So those are not a free class, but they're $75. The ones that aren't marked interactive are our regular Tuesday webinars, so you can look at those and register for those if you want to as well. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any further questions that anyone might have here after looking at our training page. Again, scrolling to the bottom for that. Let me go see what we have. Dropped gables to complete the roof. So if you're dropping a gable, not a term I'm familiar with, but let me see what I can cobble together for you to answer that for you. So you're dropping the gable. And I'm assuming that's just a lower gable that you're putting in. So if I take this side that I've selected here and I break it, let me undo that. Let me put this into 2D so we can do this. So I'm going to select this side of the roof and I'm going to select break here and break here. So we have 3 sides. So this side I'm going to make into a gable. Properties. And make into a gable. Okay, and then framing that. When we're framing the roof itself as well, I should mention, sees itself as one cohesive unit. So if I'm framing this portion out here in trusses, and maybe this is the question, and this side I'm going to stick frame. The little gables, I'll stick frame those. My dormers, I'll stick frame those. Whatever I do to the roof, it's going to do to all sections. So if you just want to stick frame part of that roof, then you have to break the roof into pieces. So I would convert it to surfaces. So once I convert it to surfaces, and I'm going to say it's a roof surface, click OK. Now there'll be individual surfaces. So this one surface, if I look at its properties, this one I can specify the framing for and have all of the different yeses to that. And this main portion, the main roof, if this was going to be trusses, I could look at it and set everything to no. But otherwise, if it's still left as one roof, all congealed together, it frames it all the same way. So if you want portions of your roof to be stick framed and portions of it in this dropped gable section to be maybe stick framed, then you would have to put those to yes and no. So I'm going to change this to no for the different ones on this main roof, just to show you the difference, how some of them, I'm going to keep that fascia, yes, and bridge, no. Okay, so if I look at view framing, display the framing, this section is empty now. There's no framing. I've left it open for trusses. This section is stick framed. So if you have a combination there, you'll have to convert the roof to surfaces to accommodate some that are stick framed and some that are not. And I'm hoping that's what you meant by the drop gable there and having it something different in how it's framed. Okay, that seems to be our only question today. So again, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules for joining me today. I appreciate your time, and I hope today that you learned something from the class itself. And I look forward to seeing you in future classes coming up in 2023. Happy New Year to everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.